Hello everyone, it's Catherine here from Inky Finger Cat. I am back with my Using Up a Magazine Kit series. This is a bit of a bumper one. I'm sort of doing 9 cards, but I've only got 4 of them on this video. I'll do the other 5 on a separate video because I thought it was only fair that you weren't going to be here for donkey's years. So I decided to do a sort of one sheet wonder. I need to take a picture, I've just realised, of the one sheet wonder that I've done because I sketched it out on a piece of A4 in my notebook, and from that I've sort of done 9 card designs. So actually, rather than me popping it on here, if you pop along to the blog, because then you'll be able to like take a copy of the actual picture, which is a bit more difficult on YouTube, isn't it? So I've chosen this piece of the paper from the kit, and now I am just going through my stash and finding some cardstocks that might go with this colour paper cardstock, including some bits and pieces of foil cardstock, things like that. And then I am going to sort of sort it out. So actually, if we just freeze frame, so you can see there, this is the way it's been cut up. There are some 4x4 centimetre squares, some 6x6 centimetre squares, a 10x10, a 6x10, and a few other bits and pieces. Okay, back to the video. So this is my one sheet wonder, and I am going to now pull apart each of the pieces that are going to go into each card, and I'm just popping myself a little label so I remember how that works. Don't know why that for some reason has repeated, but never mind. So I've popped myself a little label so I know which one's which, and I'm just pulling apart the one sheet wonder into the pieces that are needed for each card. Now, I quite often, when I'm doing this, normally I would probably get myself an envelope for each one, because then I know I can come back to it at a later point and I'll know which ones are which. But in this case, so far I've made 4 cards, and so they're all done, and the other pieces are all just sitting on the desk ready. So it will be the next project that I get around to doing. I'm just running out of time today, to then immediately set off and finish off this piece of work. Right, I've rambled a bit there, but what am I doing now? Well, I decided that to keep it really simple for myself, I would use the same focal image on every single card, and in this case it's the hummingbird from the stamp set. Now, I make a bit of a mistake here. So my intention is to do my trusty messy watercolour and then come back and emboss. And then I realised that only works if you keep the stamp in the same place. So the good news is, what my friend Helen always tells me, is there are 2 sides of a piece of paper. So I just turned it over and started again. So I've stamped all 4 in Sahara sand, and now I'm going to choose lots of different inks to make up this hummingbird. Do I know what a hummingbird actually looks like in terms of colours? Not really. So I'm sort of making this up as I go along. I am trying to be mindful of the colours of the papers that I'm using and try and sort of make things that will be sympathetic to that. But you can see here I do pretty messy watercolouring, just a couple of different colours of the green, so the sort of limey green, and then I'll start pulling in blues and teals and other colours, and it's basically just anything that I think will work with both the colour scheme and what I vaguely have decided my hummingbirds look like. Obviously each one's going to be different, but doing it like this in like little bits at a time and doing 4 at once is a lot quicker than doing 4 entirely, and then starting again with the same colour on another one. So this is my quick and easy way of doing it. It still takes a while, I have to admit, to do this. And also, I've sort of planned on 9 cards, and this is only 4 birds. So I have a bit of a change of plan for the other ones, and you will see that in a minute. I'm now going to pop you into even faster forwards so you can see the next stage, because otherwise we really are going to be here all day. My next stage is basically I let this dry, and I let it dry naturally for a bit, but I also then brought my heat tool in to make sure it was totally dry. My daughter had actually come into the room at the time that I was letting it dry naturally, so I switched the camera off and just had a chat. Then I use my embossing buddy and my Versamark to stamp directly over the images, and then I use my gold embossing powder, and I did do them 2 at a time because I suddenly realised that the images would be where the lid comes down, and I didn't want it to disturb the embossing powder, so I do them 2 at a time. But yeah, I love this technique because it just basically makes it look like your watercolours kind of a little bit more flowy and yet contained. Right, I do, however, have a change of plan for the other ones. So in this case, I decided to go and take my coloured embossing powder and just do coloured embossing for this bird, and using sort of like a quite a dark emerald green. Unfortunately, this is not the best quality of embossing powder, and it did sort of flirt off. And then I decided that I would stamp a couple using my Memento ink so that I could do alcohol inks, and then I would do a couple using the VersaFine, which is a pigment-based ink, and for that I'll use coloured pencils to do the colouring in. So again, a lot of this is in fast forward. I'm probably going to speed it up even more in a minute. For the 2 that I'd embossed, I went in just and did an even more loose watercolouring than the original. The reason I don't tend to do this and emboss first is because, well, sometimes I do, but I choose not to most of the time, because I think it makes me more precise in my colouring. I don't know why. And also you tend to then get puddles in between where the embossing is, where obviously it holds it. So sometimes it's the right technique and sometimes it's not. Then I moved on to the Memento ones and used Stampin' Blend markers in order to colour those. Again, I am not the world's greatest colourist. That is not my special skill at all. I do vaguely understand the concept of where you put the shade in, etc. But I'm not patient enough, so I tend to do fairly simple version of blending the ink when I use my alcohol markers. But there are definitely better people on YouTube to go and follow if you want to watch colouring videos. So the final one, I decided that I would do something a bit different. I wasn't entirely sure when I'd originally stamped it, but yeah, I decided to bring in my Prismacolor pencils. I rarely use these, if I'm perfectly honest. Again, because I'm not a colourist. Yeah, it was nice to sort of pull them out. And you'll see at one of the cards later on, I ended up having to do a little bit more colouring. I didn't do the colouring on camera, but I ended up colouring a couple of the flowers because I just thought it needed the flower as well on the card. I also ended up changing the colour of the hummingbird, but you'll see that later on. So the next step after colouring is, of course, the fussy cutting. And do you know what? This was not the most difficult of shapes to do. It was really quite easy, so it didn't take me too long to do it. Yeah, you can see here I've gone quite blue with that particular hummingbird, which is beautiful, but I do end up making it a little bit more purpley coloured later on. So yeah, fussy cutting, this is it going at sort of like 5 times speed. I will speed this up because obviously it's the same shape that I'm doing. In total 10 times, which is more than I needed, but it's a really simple shape to do. I do, again, on that hummingbird that I changed later on, I do end up fussy cutting it again without actually the white border, but for this purpose at the start I just did them all with the white border because I wasn't entirely sure how I'd finish each card, even though I'd got a vague design sketched out. And obviously I've got one extra bird here, so at some point I will probably pop this back in the pouch. At the moment they're all just sitting on the desk because obviously I've not finished all the cards, but yeah, I probably will end up with one left over because I've only got 9 cards sketched out with the pieces. So on to card number 1, and it does get a little bit simpler now because this is just assembly. And I have got a sketch that I'm following, that I've done, that's off to the side of me. It doesn't ever appear on camera, but that's what I'm vaguely following for my ideas. So I did the sketches the other day whilst I was lying in bed because I wasn't feeling brilliantly well, but I wanted to do something. So That's where these sketches have come from and this idea had come from. So you can see here I'm pulling in different cardstocks. At one point I wondered whether to bring in another piece of paper, but I decided against it on this card and instead decided to use all those sentiment stamps that are in the set. I thought I'd actually turn them into a bit of a background and do maybe some heat embossing. And so because it's going to get mainly covered, it doesn't really matter. Some of these sentiments are not really sentiments I would probably use frequently. Some of them are fine, but some of them I'm unlikely to use. But I thought a bit of a tone on tone in the background would be a good idea. So I went with the purple coloured embossing powder, and then I did that technique that I am currently in love with, which is splattering it with water and then picking up some embossing powder on it. And it just creates a really organic splatter. I picked up this idea from Sarah. She did either a reel or a short or something the other day, and I was like, oh my word, why have I never used water to adhere the embossing powder? Because the embossing powder itself just needs something slightly sticky to stick to, and then when you melt it, it melts into the paper and the cardstock. So the fact that you've used water, it doesn't really matter, because obviously the water will evaporate, but the embossing powder will at that point have melted onto the paper, and it just creates the best splatter. Anyway, the cardstock that is that purple that I'm using is Kingston Crafts cardstock, so it distresses really well at the edges, and so I used my little distress tool to do that, and then I started adhering everything down. Because I'd used the mirror cardstock, the foiled cardstock, for all of the panels of the pattern paper, I did exactly the same for the sentiment. Because the paper is quite thin, you do tend to need to mount it on something if you're going to raise it up, and you'll have seen there that I used a few bits and pieces of foam tape to raise up my little hummingbird. Right, we're on to card number 2. Gosh, that came quickly. So card number 2 is just 2 6x6 panels of the cardstock, and I just mounted it on that same purple cardstock, one above the other, and then I am doing the same with the sentiment, and I'm just adding that. Now you can see here, this is quite a simple card. I did not make all of them as difficult as I did with that first one with all the extra embossing, etc. Some of them are quite simple. This one, I raised that entire panel up onto the white cardstock card blank using the foam tabs. You do not need to add glue. The reason I add glue to those foam tabs is just so I've got wiggle room. And then I just brought in some very old sequins to finish it off. Dead simple. Right, card number 3. I went with a similar theme as that first one and decided to do a bit of embossing in the background. This time I've chosen some Stampin' Up cardstock. I think it's Blackberry Bliss, and it works really well with this gold embossing powder. And again, I went for quite grungy and ended up with all those splatters as well. Lots of gold embossing. It does take a little while, I will say, when you're using the water. If you've used quite big droplets like I had, it does take a while for it to evaporate and for the embossing powder to melt, because it almost counteracts it, because it's got the water sort of stopping it from melting a little bit. I then decided to just slightly distress the edges, this time with some scissors rather than the distress tool, and then just did a little bit more embossing around the edges just to give it a little bit of a frame. And I really like this sort of like slightly ruffly gold edge that it ends up with. And there's a lot of sort of like gold shimmer to that piece of cardstock now, which I think helps to just differentiate it from the card blank that I've made. Now this time it was a 6x10 panel and then a smaller one, I can't remember the size off the top of my head, that was for this, but I decided to just cut into that bigger panel and make it into a tab. And then even though I've done all that embossing, I'm going to pretty much cover most of it up, which you might think is pointless. I would agree with you. But, you know, when your decisions just, you forget how big the panel is that you're going to stick on the top. That's what happened there. This time I have teamed it with some gold cardstock. Again, this is beautiful foiled cardstock. This is Kingston Crafts. It's not been released yet in the UK at the point that I'm filming this, but it might well have been released by the time you're seeing this video. If not, that's a sneak peek. There's some foiled cardstock coming. And then onto the final card for this video. This case I had mounted onto that dark purple cardstock, just the simple 6x10 panel. This is probably the simplest of the cards in terms of it's just got that one piece of the pattern cardstock, and for that reason I ended up bringing in the flower as well. And this is the hummingbird where I did change up the colours. I added some pink and some purple into the bird. I just thought he was too blue and green and didn't quite work with the colour scheme when I'd started putting together. And this is also the one where I went back and fussy cut to get rid of the white border, because I did the same with that flower. So the flower I stamped on, I think it was when I made card number 1. Because I just stamped lots of the flowers all in one go, and so it was just left over and ready. And here we go. That's all 4 cards for today. So obviously a slightly longer video, and as I say, I'm now sort of running out of time today because I'm off out in an hour or so, and I have yet to have my shower and get myself ready. So it's a short. It's not all of the 9 cards that I'm intending to make from this One Sheet Wonder, but I am super happy with these cards. I think they're really cute with that hummingbird. I love all the shiny elements that I've started to add in. I love the fact that some of them are dead simple and some of them are not so simple. And I definitely encourage you to stamp multiples of a stamped image and colour them all in one go, and then have them ready to just start playing with when you start playing with your pieces of paper, whether you do a One Sheet Wonder or a similar kind of exercise. It just makes it a lot easier for sort of bulk making, even though these are all very different cards. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please do give me a thumbs up if you did. Sorry if I've rambled in the middle, probably have. Please subscribe to see more, especially if you want to see the other 5 cards that I end up making from this. And until next time, bye-bye.